Hey, good morning, folks. We're starting this week as week 3 of Red Letter Challenge. Welcome to you folks that may be listening online. We're not professionals with this, so apologize in advance. What about last week? Is there anybody have anything from last week? Celebrate any wins from your daily studies? Any struggles? Any challenges? Anything? Something you took away from the daily lessons this week?
I will tell you that I had several opportunities to share, and it was just very unusual. I have not actually sought after those opportunities like I have recently, and it's because of what we're doing. So different from me for a little bit. So that's
great. I think it makes you more conscious of it too, right?
It does. It makes me understand when I have those opportunities.
What about anybody take anything away from the day that it said we should be having more fun? Christians aren't fun. Christians are boring. Christians don't know how to have fun. It says it's okay to be around people that drink, smoke, have fun. I forget what else it said. I don't know why I guess I took that away because I've been hanging around with you or something. You know.
It says something about trash talking too, didn't it?
Yeah.
You're allowed to trash talk.
I do have fun.
I don't know. What about did anybody read the one on the Sabbath?
Yeah, day of rest.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at that.
What are some traditional views of the Sabbath? We used to have the blue laws, right, where all the stores were closed on Sunday. But what do like your grandma and grandpa say about the Sabbath?
You don't do
You're not supposed to
housework.
work.
Don't do housework.
Yeah, we always ate good on the Sabbath and then we rested.
Stay with your
Yeah.
family.
Sunday dinner.
Yeah.
So mom got to work, right? Mom had to work.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Grandma did, that's for sure.
Well, I know when we were growing up and we were on the farm, if we cut hay down and it wasn't ready to bale on Saturday and it was going to rain on Monday, the hay got wet. His dad would not do it on Sunday.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in the Bible, I mean, in the lesson plan, you just see that you weren't allowed to spit on the ground. You could spit on a rock, but you couldn't spit on the ground because that was making mud and that was work, right? It's just.
Oh my heavens.
And if you ate an egg that a chicken laid on a Sunday, you had to kill the chicken or two or something like that. I don't know, just some really strange.
Well, I know in today's lesson too, it says if for some reason you have to work on the Sabbath, you can still take a day of rest.
See, that's where I was going. That's where I was going,
Yeah.
right? So it's important that we do what God did. He created the earth and everything in it in 6 days, and then he rested. He didn't need the rest. He took the rest because he wanted to sit back and enjoy the goodness of what he created, and that's what we should be doing. We should take time for ourselves to spend time with the Lord and enjoying what we have and just.
It even says that you can still cut your grass on Sunday, and then you can sit back and look at all the great job you did on getting rid of all the leaves and stuff.
Well,
My guy doesn't work on Sunday.
let's switch channels back just a little bit. So this is kind of a lead-in question to the lesson today. But have you ever thought about getting somebody back?
Every day.
Oh, Lord.
Today's lesson this week is on forgiveness. So Greg Stanford shared a link to us about Father Mike, and Father Mike, he's on YouTube. It's one of the hardest things that we can do is forgive people, and one of the best models of it is in the Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer says to forgive us as we forgive those that sinned against us, right? So it's not a feeling, it's a decision when you forgive somebody. Does that mean that you still trust them? The answer is no. Do you no longer hurt because you forgave somebody?
No.
No. Can you still be friends? Probably depends on
We're
what
supposed
the
to.
situation is, right? But the parallel is with justice. And that means like basically saying there's something owed, and basically we're going to talk about this some more, is when you forgive somebody, you're not paying them back what they really deserve, right? So with that, let's see if we can get this video cranked up here.
So I love vacations. In fact, this past summer, my family who's from Florida went on a huge road trip. And we stopped in Ohio at this water park that had some really amazing looking water slides. And my kids were so pumped. And so I look up at my 9-year-old son, Nathan, and he goes down the water slide and he comes up out of the water and it's just pure bliss and excitement and happiness. And I look up thinking I'm gonna see the same thing from Brady, but rather I see him turn around, put his head down, dejected, and walk down the stairs. And I said, Brady, what's up? What happened? And he said, you have to be 48 inches to ride the water slide. My son Brady is literally 47 plus inches at this time. He's from Florida. He knows how to swim. And so I said, Brady, this isn't right. Why don't you go to that slide over there? Same rules. Surely that lifeguard's not going to be as strict as the last one. And so he does. And the same thing happens. And at this point, I huddle my boys together and I say, okay, kids, here's what we're going to do. We're getting that Brady, that son of mine, on that water slide if it's the last thing we have to do. And here's what we're going to do. Brady, I want you to go up. I want you to stand tall this time. I want you to kind of stand on your tippy toes, right? And puff your chest up and look up a little bit, because you got to be confident when you're in these things. And so sure enough, the plan works to perfection. I taught my kids how to lie. And Brady goes down the water slide. And once you go down it once, you go down it every time. Some of you might be judging me right now, thinking, how could you let your son get on that slide? Why would you ever teach your kids how to lie? But I bet in the room right now, I'm talking to a husband and wife duo that you probably went to a restaurant and ordered one drink, and yet both of you have drunk from it. I bet there's someone in the room that might have even snuck some candy or a snack into the movie theater. And possibly even as a kid, you were sneaking into places that you know you shouldn't have been in. All of us have relaxed God's commands. All of us have shaded His truth for our favor. In fact, every single one of us has failed. And as we're talking this week a lot about sin and forgiveness, I bet that there's many of you right now that can think back to something that you said, something that you thought, something that you've done that even still today you are utterly ashamed of. So as we enter into days 13 through 19 of the Red Letter Challenge, we're going to be introduced to the second principle that Jesus calls, commands, and asks His followers to put into practice. And it's a huge one. It's a foundational one. It's this theme of forgiveness. Jesus talks a lot about forgiveness. He talks about how to receive God's forgiveness, and He talks about how we as His followers are to give away His forgiveness to others. But what's crazy is when I've asked people, which one do you struggle with more? Do you struggle more with receiving God's forgiveness for yourself or forgiving other people? More than 90% of people struggle more with receiving God's forgiveness for themselves. And the truth in that is this: you cannot be a really forgiving person unless you have been forgiven by God. And after all that Jesus has done for us, we as His followers, we know what He's saved us from. We know what He's forgiven us from. And so we want to be the greatest forgivers that we can be to show people what the forgiveness of Jesus looks like in their life. Every time I fly, I'm always a little bit concerned when the flight attendant goes through the list of safety precautions. Like, I realize there's a risk when I fly. Just like I know there's a risk every time I get in my car, but I don't remind myself of that every time. And so they'll go through their spiel and they'll have you take out the emergency card in your front seat and talk about all the flotation devices and everything like that. And I'll watch them with the people in the emergency exit rows, make sure they're okay. One of the things I've noticed as a parent is they'll walk down the aisles and they'll stop if you're traveling with a child and they'll say, hey, in the case of loss in cabin pressure, make sure you put the oxygen mask on yourself first and then put it on your child. And that always felt weird to me, especially in our culture where we bow down at the altar of our kids and we'll do anything to serve our kids and whatever they need. And so it feels weird when the flight attendant says to me as the adult, you got to take care of yourself first before you can take care of your kid. Turns out there's good reason for it. When you're flying at such a high altitude and something bad happens, you can actually lose your consciousness in less than 1 minute. And symptoms start coming like nausea and vomiting and blurriness and tunnel vision. And this disease called hypoxia, which is a deficiency in the amount of oxygen your brain has, comes in, and your capacity to do simple things deteriorates. And so you have to put it on yourself first in that first minute. It's so important so you can not only save yourself, but save your child. I think forgiveness is very similar. Many of us are walking around, and yet we're walking around with unforgiveness, and the devil wants to keep that on you. But you really won't be a forgiving person until you first have received what God has given to you. Until you put that mask on, that mask of forgiveness that God has given to you, then you can give it away to others. The enemy's going to want to come, and he's going to want to keep you in a state of unforgiveness as long as he possibly can. He's going to want you to have shame and guilt and baggage and want you to stay in that forever. But you don't have to any longer. God declares to you today that you can break free. He's done everything you need to break free. Jesus Christ has already paid the price for your sins, and there is no sin that is too big or too extreme that God did not already die for. It is done. And God invites you to break free and receive His forgiveness today. Because once you've broken free, you can help others break free. Once you've been forgiven, you can give forgiveness to others. And once you've been rescued, you can join God in His mission to rescue others.
Anything jump out from the video? What are a couple things that forgiveness is? Maybe we look at what are a couple things forgiveness is not?
Easy. It's not easy.
Not easy. It's not easy. If you forgive somebody, does that mean you would think it's okay?
No.
It's not. Well, first of all, look at this quote. Everyone thinks forgiveness is a lovely idea until he or she has something to forgive. That's a quote by C.S. Lewis. But forgiveness is not condoning it. It's not enduring abuse and allowing it to happen. It's not ignoring that it happened. It's not denying that it happened. It's not to say that there should not be punishment. But what are some things that forgiveness is? How do you feel when you forgive somebody? Who gets the relief the most? Anybody?
I think the one that's doing the forgiving.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. Does everybody saw the thing with Corrie ten Boom when she finally, after years and years, met the guard where she was in one of the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, and she said she was just like, her hand was at her side and she was no way going to greet the guy, right? She just was stoic. And what happened was when she reached out and shook the guy's hand, she just felt an overwhelming sense of forgiveness. And that's a good portrayal for us, right? In the New Testament, forgiveness signified a release from obligation. In fact, when we say we're going to start with a clean slate, that's something from English pubs. So they used to keep your tab on a piece of slate with chalk, and if they were going to wipe out your debt, they would wipe the chalk off the slate. So they said you start out with a clean slate. So that's a saying that we use today that stuck with us. But let's use an example from church. Let's say somebody said something hurtful about you or started a rumor about you, and it caused you pain and got back to you. And let's just say that on a scale of 1 to 10, is that the scale of 1 is that you accidentally bumped into somebody going in a business or something like that. You said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry." Or on the other end, the 10 would be somebody murdered somebody in your family. So a 1 is like something really simple, and 10 is something really bad. Let's say this person did like a 3 to you. So what's your natural instinct when that happens?
Revenge.
Yeah. I'm gonna do a 3 to them too, right? In fact, I might even do a
Well,
4.
Matt, we're gonna
so
do a
they know.
6. It's gonna be a 6. It's got a double, all right.
Yeah, yeah.
You're not getting back anybody if you don't
I
double
think
it.
you read my notes.
Yeah. Well, I may have, but it's got to be double.
But you want to give them back, right? And that's like in the Middle Eastern thing. What do they say? It says an eye for an eye, but that's not what he said. It had been said, an eye for an eye, right? Or isn't that what we see with gang violence? Something happens, retribution, right? And usually on a scale a little bit bigger than what happened originally. Instead, biblically, we're supposed to go to that person and tell them what they did and how it hurt us. And then release them from that debt of what they did to you. And when you did that, who bears the cost of that debt?
The person that wronged you.
Yes, they caused it, but if you forgive them, you're eating the cost of that debt, right? You're saying, I know you did this to me, but it's okay. I'm going to wipe the slate clean, and you take on the cost of that wrong.
What if the person keeps doing that to you? What do you do then?
Well,
Sounds like he's talking about you, Scott.
No, I'm not talking,
are you
no.
looking at me when you say that?
No, I was just
Yeah.
saying, you know, I mean, you can forgive somebody, but if the person that done whatever they done to you is continually doing
It's a
it,
false forgiveness.
you know,
Right.
Well, I think you
I
just
guess you
got to
just
continue to
keep
do it.
forgiving them, I
Yeah.
guess.
Remember, I said earlier, you don't have to be their friend. You have to love them, but you don't have to be their friend.
Right.
Well, of the types of forgiveness, we're going to talk about receiving forgiveness today. And receiving forgiveness from God, that's our model. So who needs forgiveness from God?
Everyone.
We all do.
Who sinned, right?
Right.
What do you say in the video? All of us have done something that we're not proud of. Money talked about sneaking. I remember my friends, I never did it, snuck into the drive-in movie theater in the trunk of the car, right?
The worst I ever seen was at the Ryan's Mall. One of the ladies went to the exit door, you know, and she had a pizza delivered to the exit door and brought a whole pizza in.
Yeah. What are some examples of biblical forgiveness from the Bible? What are some examples of forgiveness in the Bible? Remember the woman at the well? He told her that she'd been married how many times, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. Forgave her. What about when the prodigal son came back? Right? What did the father do when he came back?
We celebrate.
Yeah,
Kill the patty cake.
open arms.
Let's have a party.
Get the ring out, get the robe out, right? What about the 12 brothers? What happened to he wasn't the youngest, but he was the one that had the destiny, right? Ruled over Egypt, in charge of their grain storage. Joseph.
Oh, you don't, Joseph?
Yeah, Joseph forgave his brothers for, remember how afraid they were when they realized that they were standing in front of their brother that they sold into slavery?
He could have
Yeah, that was a big one.
What's the ultimate one in the Bible, though? What's the biggest one, the example of forgiveness?
When Jesus is on the cross,
Yeah,
Yeah.
he says, Lord, forgive them.
exactly.
They know what they do.
Father, forgive them. Yeah. So we're going to jump into Matthew 18 now. So if you got your Bibles, go ahead and jump into Matthew 18. And just a little bit on the book of Matthew 18. Jesus is talking a lot about, he was asked about what the kingdom of heaven was going to be like. And he was asked initially, who is the greatest person in heaven? But Jesus went on to talk about responsibilities we have as a Christian in the verses after that. Because benefits usually have responsibilities, right? I mean, if we get benefits from something, we have a responsibility to do our part too, to make sure we keep those benefits. So in verses 3 through 6, he talks about how we as Christians should be humble, childlike. In verses 7 through 9, he talked to us about how we should handle temptation. And then verses 10 through 14, he talks about the parable of the lost sheep. You all remember what that parable was? The guy had 100 sheep and one of them was lost. And he's like, which one of you would not go find the one that was lost? And then after that, he talks about how we're supposed to settle a relationship issue. So, do y'all remember what the rules are? If we have a conflict with somebody in the, I'll say it's in a Christian setting, what's the first thing we're supposed to go do?
Go to them.
Go to them. And try to talk through it, right? And what happens if that doesn't work?
Bring someone with you.
There you go. Yep. Take 2 people with you as witnesses. And if that doesn't work, you take to the church body. And what does Jesus say to do if that doesn't work? You disassociate from that person, right? And then we get to now the focal passage, which is Matthew 18, verses 21 and 22. And can somebody read those verses, please? Matthew chapter 18, 21 and 22.
Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? And Jesus answered, I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times.
It's 21 and 22.
See, that kind of answered my question earlier.
Yeah. So was it, you said, your Bible said 77 times, right? Some Bibles say 70 times 7. So which one is it? There's a little bit of ambiguity there, right? And it's because of the way that things are translated from Aramaic to Greek or whatever. But Jim gave us some notes on this, and the way his kind of thought on it was, well, it's intentionally ambiguous. God and Jesus knew that there was going to be some confusion there, and it's not about the actual number of times you're forgiven, right? It's about, well, the quote is, it's not about keeping score, it's about losing count. So, I mean, 70 times 7 is a very big number, and who's going to keep track of that, right?
That's right, because after the 3rd time, you're going to leave. The 4th time. You don't have to forgive him the 4th time.
But we are to forgive repeatedly, and I couldn't help but think about myself. What do I pray for and ask for forgiveness? Do I ask for forgiveness for the same things all the time? Do we find ourselves, Lord, forgive me for doing this, and then the next time you pray, well, you've got to ask for forgiveness for doing it again, right? Thank God that Jesus doesn't only forgive us 70 times 7, right? But now the story continues. Matthew 18, verses 23 to 27. The king has this servant. And the servant comes before him. He's trying to settle his debts. And the servant owes 10,000 talents, or 10,000 bags of gold. 1 talent was the equivalent of 20 years' wages. So you might say back then, 1 talent was equivalent to your lifetime earnings. He owed 10,000 lifetime earnings. So what happened when he came before the king? What did he do?
Beg for forgiveness.
Yeah. The king was going to take him and his family and sell him off or throw him in prison. And the guy begged for forgiveness, and the king had mercy on him. I mean, we're talking about enough money here that he could have won the Mega Millions, right? Which somebody did, by the way. There was one winning ticket sold for the Mega Millions. Oh, and this is totally a sidetrack statement, but I told my sister, I said, you know, you're a Baptist if you keep your lottery tickets right next to your tithe envelopes. You know? So what happened? What did the king do?
He forgave him of his debt.
He took the loss. He knew there was no way possible that this guy was ever going to pay him back. He took the loss and forgave him. So, then this servant, in verses 28 through 33, somebody else owed him 100 denarii. 1 denarius was 1 day's wages. So, 100 denarii is 3-4 months' wages. Not the lifetime of earnings that the king had just forgiven him of. So comparably, it's a relatively small amount of money, right? But what did he do?
Put him in prison.
Put him in prison.
Yeah,
Had the
what did he
man
do
thrown
before
in
that?
prison.
He grabbed him by the neck.
Yep.
Right? Grabbed him by the neck, threatened him, had him thrown in prison. And when the other servants heard about it, they told the king. And the king called him before him and called him a wicked servant and put him in prison. So, I say anyone, and this includes you and me, we need to forgive. In basically 3 steps. Acknowledge that the need for forgiveness is there, whether we're on the receiving end or the giving end. Whether the person that's offending or the person that's been offended. And then, secondly, recognize that because of that event, there's an obligation, right, or a debt that needs to be paid. And if you forgive somebody, you release them of that, and you cover the cost yourself. You can no longer collect. You should not hold a grudge. We've taught, we've had Financial Peace University here in church a few times, and one of the things that Dave Ramsey tells as you go through the study is be very cautious about lending money to family members, right? Because what happens when you lend money to family members, quite often it's not going to get repaid, or it's not going to get repaid at the rate you would like it to, or what he says is that if you have the ability, just give that person that money. So it's kind of like, it's a little similar to what we talked about, right? You cover the cost yourself when it comes to forgiveness. So we talked about the things that forgiveness was not, but forgiveness is. Sometimes it's really hard, isn't it? But it is a choice. Does anybody have a good example of the event? You don't have to name any names, but don't we see some of the worst rifts between family members over some petty things sometimes?
Or, I mean, I have had a situation where these friends were my ride or die Christian friends, and that I go to church with, and some things happened, and I got the short end of the stick, and they continued in their service, and that was a challenge to me to forgive, and still try to be their friend.
Mm-hmm. It's costly.
It's very costly.
You're feeling the cost. I mean, don't you hear of family members that don't speak? I mean, I
all
wasn't
the
raised that
time.
way, but I mean, I've heard and I know of people that, well, I'm not speaking to that person. I mean, usually the person that's not speaking is the person that's doing the most harm to themselves, right? Forgive and move on. Forgiveness is not a one-time event. I mean, Jesus said to do it either 77 times or 70 times 7. But the point is that that's to be our nature as a Christian. Is there any difference between the way God forgives us and the way we forgive others? What about what he said in the video? Is it harder to forgive yourself, or is it harder to forgive other people?
Well, God forgives and forgets. Sometimes when we forgive, we don't forget.
It's more unconditional. We give conditional forgiveness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
like an if-then statement.
If then, yeah.
Yeah.
And we usually have some kind of disclosure or some kind of clause that allows us to do something different.
You say, I'll forgive you if.
Yeah.
It's pretty sad. Yeah, if we could forgive like God, it'd be a wonderful world.
No doubt. So rank yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is very poor and 10 is excellent, how are you doing at receiving and giving away forgiveness?
Would that be 2 different scores?
Yeah, I suppose so. I suppose so. Well, look, this book is supposed to challenge us, right? And I know I've been challenged as we go through the daily exercises, and sometimes they don't jump out at me, but then other days it kind of slaps me beside the head. And if you're not keeping up in your books, I would encourage you to catch up. You can always catch up, but some of them are go spend a half hour with God. You know, it's kind of hard to catch up on that stuff.
Yes.
And one of them is fasting. So has anybody thought about actually what you might fast from?
Diet Coke.
Twitter.
Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter.
Sydney's was fasting from social media for the day.
Yeah, that would be
The whole day.
pretty
I was
easy.
like, oh,
I've
okay.
been doing that for 3 years.
I was gonna say, I'm not on it.
I am. I get on there
My sister.
usually
leave me
once a
on.
day, maybe twice
I
a
don't
day.
even know how to get on Twitter much. That would be
I ain't been on Facebook in 3 or 4 years now.
We usually associate giving up something like around the time of Lent, right? But it doesn't have to be that way, right? And it doesn't have to be, like you said, it can be an activity, it can be food. The important thing is that it's something that means enough to you that when you're going through that and you think about that you're not doing it, it reminds you why you're doing it, right? And it kind of compels you to spend more time worshiping. So, sounds like we're done in record time today. The good thing about that is we're at least going to have enough storage space on the iPad today. Because I think the last 2 weeks we had to switch devices to continue recording. But does anybody have any closing thoughts? Maybe a real life example of something that happened that you want to share?
I think this lesson here is one of the best ones we've had so far, because we all can learn a lot from this one.
I feel better about it. Maybe you and I should spend some time talking this week.
Scott thinks.
I forgive you.
Hey, Scott thinks you're supposed to forgive him.
Is that
I guarantee you, that's not a two-way.
I always
That's not
forgive him.
that's not a two-way street, bull.
Hey,
So it's,
if I had to count the times I said, I'm sorry I did that.
That's all right, Bull, I bore the cost. Now everybody knows your name. All
I
right.
don't know, when you start gauging that on that scale from 1 to 10, it could get, I started looking at that, it really points out that I'm not very good at forgiving. And, it's just that, it's a hard thing to do. It's really hard to do.
It is.
Especially in a work environment, especially when you feel like there's people that are intentionally doing you wrong a lot of times. It's a tough deal.
So let's turn that around a little bit and think about how God feels about us, and even more, sometimes that's what keeps people from coming to church and entering into a better relationship with God, right? Because you feel like, well, I've sinned so many times and I've done the same thing so many times. God doesn't want to be around me, but that's not the case, right? 70 times 7, or 77 times, wherever. I mean, it's unlimited. So, thank you.